One of the most famous administrative law cases is the Chevron case. This is one of the few administrative law cases that is actually discussed in the popular press. This arose in the early 1980s during the Reagan administration, and it dealt with the correct strategy for monitoring air pollution from complex industrial facilities. The Clean Air Act is directed at improving the quality of the ambient air, the air people breathe, but it does not provide a lot of direction on the best monitoring and regulation techniques to achieve this. This is left to the expertise of the agency. The problem arises that when you have multiple sources of pollution, the best way to measure the pollution to control the ambient air. One alternative is to require measurement of the pollution for each pollution source. Environmental groups favor this because it more tightly regulates the pollution. It gives a better idea about what the emissions are from each source. The EPA was opposed to this because it's regulatorily complex to keep track of all the sources. It's regulatorily expensive to keep track of the sources. And industry opposed it because it's quite expensive to keep track of pollutants from every source in large industrial facilities. The alternative proposed by the EPA was termed the bubble system, which is to essentially measure the air in the region of the stacks. This measures the pollutants in the ambient air, which is the air people breathe, but it doesn't measure the specific contribution of each source. Industry favored this because it was cheaper and because their goal would be to reduce the overall pollution. This might allow them to reduce the pollution from sources that were more easily and cheaply changed and not have to change every source, some of which might be quite expensive or impossible to change. The court established a two-step test in Chevron. The first step is to read the statute and to see whether it clearly prohibits or clearly allows the rule. At step one, the court is just doing ordinary statutory interpretation, looking at text, the structure of the statute, statutory purposes, and even legislative history. There's no deference to the agency at this point, and the objective to step one is to determine whether the statute forbids the agency action or whether the statute clearly allows the agency action. If the agency action is forbidden, the rule will be struck. If the agency action is clearly allowed, the agency action will then be permitted and the case will be dismissed. If, however, as in the Clean Air Act, the statute is ambiguous, the agency action might be allowable under the statute, but it's not clear that it is. Then the court goes to Chevron step 2 to evaluate the reasonableness of the agency action. Chevron step 2 recognizes that when interpreting an ambiguous statute, this leaves room for policy making and that the policy choice belongs to the executive branch, not the courts. The court's role is to determine whether the agency action is reasonable, not whether the agency action is the best action under the statute. Thus, the court might believe in the Chevron case that it would be better to measure each pollutant source, but since the bubble method was allowable under the statute, was reasonable under the statute, it would have to allow the agency to use the bubble method. It's clear that the agency does not have to prove that its choice is the only choice, or even that its choice is the best choice, just that it is a reasonable choice. Conservative critics of regulation hate Chevron. It has been a topic of popular press criticism. Justice Gorsuch had written extensively on why he doesn't like Chevron. That was one of the reasons he was brought to the attention of the Federalist Society and was appointed to the Supreme Court. Ironically, the Trump administration, since it's trying to change rules passed by the Obama and previous administrations, will find that Chevron deference is actually its greatest friend. Agencies drafting rules and then defending them in court should be careful not to claim there's only one interpretation of a statute. That is an invitation to the court to see if it can find another interpretation. The agency should also not claim it has the best interpretation, because again, that invites the court to look at other interpretations and see if there's a better one. The key is just to say that the statute is subject to many interpretations. It could support very many different regulatory choices. The one the agency has chosen is just a reasonable one, not the best one.